Coolio. We are back with Andrena and Andrena. This is our last session for 2024. We'll come back, what was it, January 8th or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll skip a week again because I have to travel, and then we'll be back on the 22nd. And then back to our flow. I just want to share with everyone this we've been going since May 2021, and we've been in the weeds for like 2 years. This time last year, we were working with Dialectus um, with Joel, and that we got through only half of those. We gave him a break. So that all is very cool, and just wanted to thank everyone for continuing to show up. It feels really good, and you guys are doing great IDs. I think that was what I wanted to say, and we'll pass it to Sam now.
Thank you, Claire. So Claire, we didn't discuss this beforehand, but do you want people to maybe put into the chat possible species groups to work on? I'm not sure that we have to. We really haven't had much of a pattern, and we'll finish up, I think, most of this Andrena sensu stricto group today, unless we get bogged down there. But what do you think?
Always solicit requests. Been doing that the whole time. Got some good feedback though on the Andrena going by subgenera. And
okay,
I
we can
consistently
continue
send out
doing
the
that.
2 subgenus guides. So if anybody has a contrary opinion, please totally share, and we will adjust. And also, if there's any groups that you have more bees because you've been watching us and maybe we didn't have enough, whatever, that you want to send or present, always open to that. But I think we've gone through a lot of stuff. We could go back through and inventory. But yeah, we're always happy to refresh or do nail down on a specific species too, if you want. Like we spent so much time on Carolina last time. Is that what you mean, Sam?
Yeah. Also,
Communicate. We're all
I
good.
don't know if David, you want to make any pictorial announcements, or do you want to punt on that?
Pictorial. So Sam, you're talking about stocking Discover Life with more and better images, right?
Yeah.
As a
We've been
general
having
category.
a dialogue on that, but do you want to get into to make do some recruiting here or not at this point?
Yes, let's do one moment of recruiting. So I will just say for my part, over a long period of time, I generate these images for various uses. And any place I see, oh, that would fit into Discover Life, I want to stick it there. So we've done a fair amount of that. And I make decent photographs, I think most people would say, but there are tons of people making equally good or even better images that should be in Discover Life, but they're connection. So if we can, I think what we need to be talking about is like a pipeline. Like how can we recruit more folks to put more of the material that they generate that should be in Discover Life to get it there. So I can say that much for now.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So just winging off that, if you maintain your own site, or someone within your group that has really good high quality pictures, contact me, I guess is the easiest thing to do. And we'll look for a way to bulk upload. And then we can add whatever attributions you want to those pictures very easily, and a contact email and a copyright if you want a copyright on it. So we have, when people click on a species page, we get, as much good detail as we can. Better is, the more shots, the more of the details of a particular species, pronotocolor, etc., the better. So let us know, and I guess I'll leave it at that. And you can email me or Claire, and both of us, and then we'll get into Andrena thaspii. How's that?
Go team.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to share, And Andrena thaspii is part of this group of Andrena, the sensu stricto group, so the subgenus that is also called Andrena. And why I'm there, PowerPoint, I want this screen to come up. There we go. Okay, so you should see the Andrena female guide here. And rather than, so you can see this particular character that we're looking at the moment. I did a search. You can always find very quickly if you know, like, oh, there's some detailed couplet or groups of characters and their participants here in the guide somewhere. You can always click on has and then do a word search. Like, so I did has, it opened up, who knows, maybe 200 plus different couplets, some of which are very specific, like this one. And then you can type in a word, do a word search. So I just typed in thaspii, dropping the one I, and here we go. So it's a good way to shortcut a lot of identification work once you become super familiar with the guides and the species, knowing that, okay, it's either this or that. Let me just go and look up any detailed information within Discover Life in the keys and without having to step through the keys. You're always welcome to do that, but with a large guide like the Andrena one, it can be time consuming. Okay, so here you can see some of the players. These are all within that Andrena sensu stricto group, but not every one of them. I don't know that there's any one thing that tied these together, but they were designated by the algorithm here called resolve in the program that these were super similar and deserving of a longer treatise on separating them out and the characters that help with that. So here we have Andrena. So we've talked about these others within the context of their males having mandibular processes. So here's mandibularis, rufosignata, and we covered the females at the same time. However, when you're looking at just females, you don't necessarily know that the males have any kind of mandibular tooth unless you have both species, both genders in your collection. So, and that leads to some confusion, particularly when you talk about onesie, twosie kinds of things. So Andrena thaspii is a northern species. I don't believe we have any records for Maryland, although it's possible in Western Maryland there could be a specimen or two waiting for us. It's mostly a northern thing, so I don't see that much. I don't see that much in the way of northern material. But we're going to look at that now. And what we will see, the key thing here, and Spencer, you can pipe in here at any point, or Sarah, I see a couple Northerners in there, on your struggles with thaspii and the rest of this group. So we're really talking about separating these three here, not so much Carolina, which has a lot of distinctive features as we saw last time. So here's the key, and this is what we often do, is we highlight using caps the, or a character that is largely restricted within a couplet, or a feature within the character of several species that largely is distinctive, we'll capitalize. So here you can see bidentate. So the labral process being bidentate is going to be unique to thaspii amongst this group. So the rest of these have either a simple, meaning that the line of the border of the labral process is smooth, and or it's cut into as if by a small semicircle. So we would call that emarginate, or sometimes we would call it slightly emarginate, giving you some options to play around with. And often you're scoring them for more than one thing. It might be, well, simple, possibly slightly emarginate. So you would score it for both. Anyway, you end up down here, and thaspii has, and we're going to put a specimen onto the microscope stage here and take a look at the sometimes tricky to see bidentateness of thaspii, just because there's a lot going on down there. And like we've seen in several Andrena species, the fact that it's bidentate can be partially hidden by the angle in which one looks at the structure. All right, let's see if I can find this now. And we're
While
on power.
while
Yeah.
you are setting that up, Matt has a question. I
Okay.
heard rufosignata is more associated with bogs and wetlands, and thaspii from drier habitats. Is that the case?
I am going to ask the New Englanders and any Canadians of that group to answer that. So go ahead.
I'll jump in here. I'm working up in Vermont, where thaspii and rufosignata are both fairly common. Rufosignata is sort of like all of the nice mixed northern hardwood forests, but also on a lot of the fun bog plants. And then thaspii in Vermont, at least, is somewhat localized, but and the habitat where maybe I find it most would be like steep low elevation steep hills that are a little bit drier, but it shows up in gardens and probably in wetlands as well. The easiest way to tell them apart outside of the microscope up here, though, is that thaspii is a summer bee, like June and July, and rufosignata is early May, maybe early June, but they almost don't overlap in phenology from what we found in Vermont.
That's a good one. Also, when we see rufosignata to some extent down here in the western part of the state, not super commonly, but around, but I think all the records are deciduous woodlands, in the woods kinds of things, not lounging around in the borders or outside. So I think that matches your phenology kind of thing, like it's hitting the spring vernal bloom, perhaps, the rufosignata, and then thaspii doing something else. What do we know? I'm not sure. But so anyone else with some additional observations of thaspii in particular, but also rufosignata?
Sam, this is Sarah. I'd have to look, but I'm pretty sure that I get those two species from the same collection, same time of year, same survey in the blueberry fields. So, of course, there's that spring huge flush of flowers, and it may be pulling, and the fields are surrounded by woods. So I think that might be a unique situation that pulls in a whole bunch of different bees to get this very short-lived flowering. So, but yeah, I haven't seen a distinct separation necessarily between those two species.
Okay.
In Maine. So we're in Maine.
Yeah. Yeah. And that makes sense. And so all these things could essentially be true depending on which environments you're spending most of your time on. And as you mentioned, blueberries are a woodland and edge. And under normal circumstances, blueberries are occurring throughout all the woods, but in sort of a repressed state. And they are also out in burns and fields and open areas where they really need to be in order to produce fruit. And of course, they're in Maine in particular, and these barrens are highly manipulated. And I think I've seen a bunch of your material in the past from the blueberry areas, and you're also getting things like Bradley eye and what else? Carolina in those same areas. Sarah?
Yes, those are definitely, we'll get all those in the blueberry fields during bloom.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole system is an interesting one because like down here, we have the same thing, different sort of environmental conditions, very acidic also, but more on that loblolly pine end of the spectrum to pitch pine. But a lot of these areas have a huge understory of huckleberries, and we may have, like here at Patuxent, I think we have probably close to 10 different Vaccinium and Gallisachia species doing all, and many other, a bunch of other ericaceous shrubs. So just that whole what do what does the ericaceous shrub community do with all these Andrena and other species of bees is really interesting in terms of how they partition it. You can just look up the bees that are using Vaccinium staminium, which doesn't even really look like a blueberry bloom in traditional sense. It's more open and dangling. And then you have Melita and Panergynous and all kinds of different things on there, all within the same genus. Anyway, it's fun, right? This is what makes bees fun. There's so much complexity in these systems.
I'm going to read just a little bit more from the chat. Is Matt says he's not able to get on the mic, but in Arkansas, right? That's AK. We get lots of thaspii in south-facing grass-forb slopes in June on Potentia. There we go. And other things just don't have a handle on rufosignata.
Huh.
And then Spencer knows how to unmic if he wants to contribute.
Okay, so that was in Arkansas. I'm actually kind of surprised. I think I don't think
Alaska. You just clarified in the chat.
Thank you.
Alaska.
Sorry about that.
Oh, Alaska. Okay, it's like, wow, that's crazy. But Alaska totally makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
The old
do I have a mic? I can't tell.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm Puget Sound lowlands. We get them both in disturbed habitats. The same sites, but wildly different phenology. Rufosignata is mid-April. Thaspii is mid-July.
Yeah, interesting. And also, when you have that big West Coast, East Coast, I believe with thaspii, there's what is it? West Coast specimens are darker. Is that the story? And who knows if they are or not a different species.
Yeah, until somebody runs the DNA, I just follow the key. But yeah, they're pretty dark.
I saw that mentioned in Discover Life. In my experience, the Vermont specimens are distinctly darker and hairier than rufosignata. So they've got like a brown hair wash sort of over the whole body, particularly on the abdomen, whereas rufosignata doesn't really have much hair to speak of on the abdomen. And the thorax can often be less hairy on rufosignata. The one that throws me for the biggest loop up here is mandibularis, which sort of looks like a thaspii in the general hair and color, but then is flying in even before rufosignata, at least from our few records. It's a really early, scrubby, sort of warm, messy habitat. But we only have a few of them. It seems like we're at the northern edge of their range.
Yeah, I don't know. So Macupinensis, which is also within that group, but easier to tell apart, is a willow specialist, and I'm not sure what people really don't know about mandibularis, but it fits. But the clade of this particular subgenus of Andrena seems to be doing quite a lot of different things and has spread themselves way out phenologically. I have that general sense that mandibularis is mostly forest, but using a lot of different kinds of plants. And I often am tricked by mandibularis too when I'm keying it out. It seems particularly generic, and it does have a complete. So here we're looking at thaspii. Here's that nice cutout when you bend it over. So I'm looking at it a little more straight on rather than straight down. But mandibularis would have a complete simple labral process there and not this cutout. It also, I forget, I want to say, we can move it to check, I might as well do that, that thaspii tends to have a color of the fovea that's more white, and I could have this wrong though. And the others often, like rufosignata in particular, seems to have a very much dark hair internals. Now, we've got a lot of glare on this. I really need to change the lighting. I'll temper it down. So I can't quite tell whether, actually, I'll look at the other specimen I have. But I have a generally lighter color, and mandibularis, I believe, has more, yeah, it totally depends. Like I can change the angle on this and get the upper part to be completely white. I believe mandibularis has more of a two-tone to it, but is in between, and you often end up looking at that labral process for something definitive. And in the females, right, you don't have the mandibular tooth on there. Now, this one has its mandibles open. If we go back here, you see in mandibularis, it has mandibularis with this tiny tooth, which is really obscure. We saw that at the last time we looked at it, right near the articulation. So that's where the mandible is joined to the head. It's basically like a hinge. And but a lot of sometimes I don't really see it. And here it says thaspii mandible without a basal tooth. Yes, probably, but it's just this tooth here in mandibularis is so small that it becomes difficult to work with. And this is a character, I believe, that is used by, I want to say, Mitchell, and I'm not sure if Wally LaBerge's treatment also did the same, that you needed to find it with a tooth, but I find it very difficult to find. So up here, if we look at mandibularis again, malar area moderate, thaspii malar area also moderate. So that helps to define, oh, I probably am looking at a Andrena sensu stricto group or similar. Label process entire, that's going to separate it out. Tiny tooth, possibly useful as a secondary thing, but otherwise there's not much here that's separating these two, except for those kinds of characters. But anyone else got anything to add for the separation of those two? I'll put a different, while you're doing that, I will reposition this so we can see it more straight down. In general, what's going to be sort of obvious when you're at that, what species of Andrena am I looking at here at all? You're going to see that the pronotocollar is sharply faced, so there's corners to it. You're not going to see it right now because we're looking straight down in the hairs, but it does have sharp corners. We've looked at that quite a bit. So that's a good character. It's got a reasonably big malar space. Usually Andrena have none for the group, and not a long head. And from there, you have to go in and start keying things out. I'm going to knock. You can see that this is sort of the presentation while dirty and with too much. Oh, I can add some more light this direction here, I think. Get it to, well, the problem is I'm using a reflector, a ring light, and anything glossy is going to show up like this. Let me take a second and bring the lighting back down. And I'm not sure why I'm not able to do that. Do that. Sure. What is going on here?
Do you want to return to like where we can see the whole application and maybe just rerun live?
Yeah, let me try that. I'll hit escape. Maybe I can jump out with escape. Okay. And now make this a little darker. See if we can see this a bit better. There we go. So it just has these hints of bands, but very light and open. I think mandibularis has largely the same kind of thing. And you can see there are, as was mentioned, dark hairs in amidst either light hairs or reflections that make them look light in there. And I don't have much more to add, except that mandibularis / thaspii is often something that people spend a bunch of time looking at. And sadly, I don't have any males, and I believe the males are, we'll take a jump over there, are also a little problematic. It wouldn't have a tooth because it is not a toothed species. And there's Pick. Let me just take this. Hey, Pick, we're doing pretty well right now.
Okay.
Mhm.
Just take this and try to figure out what's happening there. Got some errors coming up, but I don't know how to fix them, and I
Mhm.
don't know if that's your fault. Anyway, but you're doing pretty well.
We seems to be behaving. So
Okay.
thank you, Pick.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes, sorry about all that. Bye-bye.
Not a problem. Bye-bye. All right. Now it'll probably stop working. Okay. We go back. We're going to do what we talked about last time for the males here. We're in the male guide at this point. Control F, thaspii, I. And I'm not seeing a specific character, which means that probably it's keying out based on the general characters of the species not having a formation at the base, in other words, not having a tooth, probably having almost certainly a bidentate labral process, having the sharp pronotal collars, and then following through with the guide as a whole. Does anyone have any male well, not mandibularis because that's got a tooth, but let's say thaspii comments? I'll get another species out, frigida. Okay, I'm not hearing a lot, so I think that sort of approach generally works. Andrena frigida, and then we have the uncommon, and I only have one specimen, clarkella. Both of these are northern species. I want to say frigida is a willow specialist. If someone could confirm that, that would be great. And it's also one that we have, I believe it's frigida, is one that has been noted for Maryland. We're in the middle of writing up the Bees of Maryland, District of Columbia, has been noted for Maryland, but we have yet to find it again. It's been about 100 years since there's been any records. We do look at willow, but it might be, I believe this species is out extremely early in most places. So we'll take a look here. Maybe we'll do some keying on it. I don't have a great sense of this bee as a species. So let's take a look at the face. Is pretty distinctive. Go back to the female, then we'll go back to elements here. It's got very, very dark facial fovea, which is striking. And let's go and see if we have in the females here. We'll start with that. Okay, go to has and look at frigida. Okay, frigida versus rufosignata. So we were talking about rufosignata in the last session and noting that it has very, very dark facial fovea also. So here, when we're separating these particular two, we have differences in the clypeus pitting and mostly touching in frigida, lower half almost entirely dulled. So a lot of times in Andrena, it's very useful to look at the clypeus. In fact, it's one of the forward-facing characters in the Andrena guide to look and see whether the clypeus has got Dulled areas only around the base, no dulled areas. In other words, it's all shiny or it's entirely dulled. And that's useful in terms of broad cut points for the characters, but it's also useful in comparison to other specimens that you might have. Just looking at the Clypeus and comparing the patterns found on the Clypeus between several specimens can be illuminating just by itself. So looks like the lower half dulled, high density microscopic lines, and there is only a small area that is shiny by implication here along the rim. Malar space short, so a lot of these have pretty long ones, less than 1/4 the width of the base of the mandible, and the opposite here is true. So the head is going to be a little bit longer because it's got a malar space much longer, and we have the Clypeus much more reflective and shining, and the pits never touching. So we got a lot of head issues here. Let's jump back to my specimen, and we'll take a look at the Clypeus, which should be relatively dull, with the exception of a small part right at the rim and lots of overlap or touchingness of the pit. So we can see pretty firmly here, lots of pits, many of them are touching, and there's the smallest of shiny areas there right at the rim. Everything else being highly inscribed by microscopic lines, tessellate, or whatever descriptor you want to use for that. But that's pretty, we could pull out rufosignata, but better to probably just move on. This appears to be a complete labral process. It's not useful in separating those two here, but just in contrast to the last one. This line here can be useful in some species. So we have a raised line that runs down, often unpitted, down the center of the Clypeus. So just another one of the Clypeal patterns and configurations that are useful in separating species, even if you don't know what they are. Looking for this raised line, or often it's simply an unpitted line. So there's pits on either side in a remaining area that is unpitted. This one actually looks a bit raised in addition to a minute area not being pitted, as you can see as it goes down. Okay, and when we look at the head as a whole, it's difficult without measuring things, but a lot of what we're doing in Discover Life is in broad strokes, looking at whether the heads are wide or long and other features are done in comparison. And if you were to compare that to rufosignata, you would see that this is a much, let's call it rounder, equilateral shaped head, so it's not as long. And the malar space, which is often a correlate, changing it to show you the malar space, is often a correlate of head length. So if you have a long head, usually or often, most of the time, I think, have a long malar space because something has to get longer. And it seems like the eye doesn't get longer, but the area between the mandible and the bottom of the eye is one of the features that gets longer. Sometimes there's compression of the head and you don't have it as wide or broad of surface area between the compound eyes. So here, it's a little bit tricky to see. Let's see if we can zoom in a tiny bit more. So first of all, no little tooth here. So here's the two articulations. So that's where the mandible hinges into the head of the bee. And then there's a muscle attachment. It's a little murky to me right here. It's probably that at this point here. And this seems to be unusually swollen. So I'm not quite sure how to classify that particular malar space. I'm going to swap it out, see you another specimen with the hope that we see a clearer presentation of the malar space here. It's a bit similar. So there's the articulations, and there's something going on here that seems to be a little bit larger than normal. Here's the eye, and then there's a rim around the eye. So there is a banded area, and then this space in between. So it's noticeable as it is in all the sensu stricto species, but it's not as long. So we would use the width of the mandible as a comparative tool. It's not as long as some of the others. So when you're keying something out like this, and that's your only specimen, this becomes difficult because is it long or is it not long? It's sort of open to question. But if you had rufosignata next to you, you would see how much longer it is in comparison. But having single specimens is problematic. So that's why ultimately having a collection, at least of your region's bees over time, and then going back and reviewing them, because you'll realize, oh, I was making some mistakes here and there. Everyone does that. I was just looking at some of my earlier mistakes today, but they can be updated. So
Sam,
yeah, go ahead.
While you have that on deck, Spencer observed that he finds the fovea frigida more black versus distinctly brown in rufosignata. And I'll also just nudge folks on the species page with rufosignata. We have some really good diagrams and a picture that I believe is from David. While frigida, we are short on pictures. So if our northern friends want to send us a specimen or two or send them to David, they will be populated.
Okay, so Spencer said the face is flatter and rufosignata has a more humpy clipius. Am I getting that right?
That is not what was said. The fovea frigida more black versus
more
distinctly
black,
brown.
not flat.
Yes.
The elderly. Okay. It is. Oh, so they're even more black than, it is very noticeably black than rufosignata. Yeah, that's a dark pit. Okay. So I do have, I think because the specimen I have for clarkella is a female, before I jump to the frigida males, tend to have fewer noticeable characteristics and also being aware of time. Let's jump to but of course that should be where we spend our time, is in the hard ones. But clarkella is such a, first of all, it's a lovely bee and also has very distinct, when you see it, it's like, oh, that is, I'm going to remember that one. So let me see if I can get it into
While you're getting it, I
focus here.
forgot to read two others. I apologize. Spencer also observes frigida and clarkella are on willows in Vermont fairly frequently. Frigida is almost always the first bee of the year, often in sap buckets. That's real early.
Oh.
And Sarah Bushman, frigida they're also found in the blueberry fields, found foraging on blueberry, ditto. I don't remember what that was for, but thaspii and rufosignata. So blueberry fields, early bee.
Interesting. So just a couple observations. One is that Mike Ushelin, I always mess his name up. Sorry, Mike. At Forest Service, Georgia, makes canopy traps out of simple white plastic buckets. Let's call them quart or half-gallon size plain white buckets. And he fills them with soapy water or propylene glycol, and he puts veins on top, which I believe he makes himself. And we've done this too. And then just ropes them up into trees and catches unbelievable numbers of bees. And we did too. We can confirm this. So the fact that you have huge numbers of acres, unless they all went to the plastic pipe horrible technique of sap buckets throughout New England, I just wonder if there's investigation. I guess the galvanized sap buckets, do they use those still? Versus the 5-gallon bucket, but there could be a lot of bees in those buckets. So it's a question mark there. And I also will note that my daughter does the sap run for a farmer in Rhode Island. And so I'm going to have to get her to pull out all the bees. So note to self. Okay, so there's this pattern through clarkella. This is another northern species. It runs down the northern part of the Appalachia, but not that far. And you can see distinct black on the back, a white T1 area, and these really fluorescent orange, yellow, really orange tibial sections in here. And some of that, I believe, also is expressed in the hairs. If you had a better specimen, hair on the thorax, and we'll put it on its side. And then there's quite dark hairs throughout the head too. So you have like Milwaukeeensis on steroids here. I'm going to just present that because it's usually one of those things like, oh my gosh, what is that? You don't have to really spend too much time before you figure out the species. But does anyone else want to mention anything about clarkella? It's just something I have almost no experience with. So any notes on their natural history are of interest to me, at least. Do people even see this very much up there? Up there in New England. I don't know that it runs far west, though. Go ahead, Spencer.
We find Clarkella sort of in the colder, willowy swamps of Vermont in the mountains, fairly commonly. Almost all females. I've only ever identified a couple males. And one fun natural history note that'll be published fairly soon is that it appears that Nomata valida is a Clarkella eater. They've shown up
Oh,
together a
very
handful of
cool.
times, and
Yeah.
the ranges pretty overlap.
Yeah. So that's interesting about valida. And I wonder if it's also using some other things, because I think we have a couple of Western Maryland records, and I don't know what's going on to the south of something we've called valida, but it still could all fit together. Those tricky nomata. That's cool. And so I could look this up, but is it thought to be a willow specialist?
I have
Yeah.
only ever seen it on willow. Yeah.
Okay. Very good. So I'm gonna, yeah.
Matt can confirm it's quite common in Alaska, first bee of the season, late March to April, mostly on the first willows. And
Okay.
it might snow on them after they've emerged.
Say it one more time.
They might also get snowed on.
Ah, okay. And I believe valida runs all throughout that northern biome. So that makes a lot of sense. All right, I want to return before the end here to look at male frigida, since it is the only specimen that I have of the last three here with males, and see what, again, this is just outside of my box in terms of experience. But let's run to the males. We're in the has area as is, but let's see if frigida has anything going on here. It shows one, but that's just the name of the specimen. So it does not. While I take a looky-loo at what appears to be only one frigida specimen, what I'm seeing, dark hairs along the inner eyes, white hairs elsewhere. I'm seeing some pretty long hairs throughout, particularly underneath the mandibles. That's pretty interesting. So very hairy bee, as is its opposite gender. I don't see anything in particular as a standout. It has the usual features of a noticeable malar space, probably listed as not as long as the others, and a very crisp corner to the propodial triangle. Not propodial triangle, what am I talking about? The pronotum, and a pretty wide cheek. I'll put this under the microscope, and we can run the guide on it until we run out. Both Claire and I have to split right at our 2 o'clock point, but we'll have fun at the end. So here you see pretty wide head, really long white hairs on this species. As usual, probably does not show up as much as the females in terms of captors. Here you see these bands, which occurs regularly in other species too, but often adds a distinctive element to the identification. It's got dark hairs running around the eye. The back side has white. The front very much massively has white hairs all over. But these are dark hairs throughout these areas that line it. Speak up, anyone, if you have some like, oh, it's obviously has this too, and we'll start the guide and as the countdown
Up here, at
continues.
least early in the spring, I find the dark hairs inside the eyes are pretty distinctive and quite obvious.
So most of the other Andrena species you're seeing are pretty much entirely pale-faced.
Carlinii is the exception.
Yeah.
And like from a specimen in the hand, the amount of hairs on the thorax seems to be pretty safe.
Yeah, so Carlinii would be similar in terms of those hairs, but it would have a much longer vertex distance. So that would be the distance between the lateral ocelli and the back of the head. And I would say in general, well, could be about the same size, but it'd average larger. And a neat thing about Carlinii is if you look underneath on the sternites at the very end of the abdomen, I guess it would be S7, it's maybe S8. I'm not 100% sure, but it presents as this little orange brush. And none of the other Melandrina have that. I'm not even sure I put that into the guide, but if I have any questions, because usually the characteristics of those black hairs are patently obvious. If I have any questions, though, because the specimen's goopy or something else, I flip over and look at the underside. And that is not the case here with frigida. And in fact, also frigida appears to have S6 is ambiguously turned up, but it looks like the corners, we'll show this. This is a pretty good character. So let's focus on differences with Carlini vibe-wise. So over time, knowing about the habitat and the time of year and places is strong evidence in your identification string. All right, we're flipping back, looking at the sternites, so the underside of the bee. And we're looking at the very end, which in males is a useful area a lot of times to concentrate on, because particularly some groups have very sharply downturned, when you're looking at them this way, they'll be upturned edges. Sometimes, like in this flat screen, it's a little bit difficult to see. But what you can see here in frigida is, maybe we'll turn it to the side, but this is the plane of the sternites. So a lot of species, this back part does not depart significantly from the same plane. In other words, it's flat throughout. In many others, there's a very crisp upturned area or downturned that lines this edge. And sometimes that upturned area can end up with points on either side like this does, although it's hard to see here, but we hopefully will get a different look. Points on either side, dog ears, cat ears, whatever you might want to call them, that are pretty distinctive and useful and helpful in confirming the species. So we have moved that character now to the front page. And by the way, we can move any character. We have control, shall we say, over the front page of the guides. Ooh, a lot of hair down here. I'm not sure how well we're going to be able to see things. So this right here, I believe, is the part of what we would call S8, which in Andrena is useful sometimes, mostly when it's very, very different from the norm. So you can't see it from this direction, but S8, this projecting thing, the end has different shapes. And in several species, if it, particularly Andrena erigenea, it's completely forked. So it's like a big Y at the end. In many of the others, it's somewhere between emarginate, slightly toothed, or convex. And so not that useful. And this is what would have that orange tuft in the Carlini, and also would probably not have these white hairs. What I'm looking for is this area through here. That would be the rim of T6, but it is so occluded by hairs that really can't pull it out. So, which makes it, not the best of the characters. So let's go back here and take some more walking through the guide. So start, and we know that this particular specimen, well, we'll just use Vermont as a placeholder where it was found thing. I'm not sure where this one was. I'd have to look it up. So Vermont, and we know it's in the spring. Wait a minute, I have it here. This was Massachusetts, and it was April 8th. So we'll just put April, pretty generic month for all spring Andrena. I'm going to skip the body length for now. So Clypeus, this is another great character within the males, which always seem to be like scary, I think, from a lot of people, but a lot of times there's yellow somewhere on the face. This has no yellow. And when we hit the search button, we can get rid of that. We start narrowing it down. I might be in misbehaving mode here again. I have a weird open bar that keeps showing up on my screen that is in the way. Okay, well, let's look at, well, Discover Life is thinking about participating. Let's take a look at the vertex, and it's going to be somewhere between 1. So a lot of times you get a vertex, we're down to 55. So you get a vertex that's about 1. But, when you have something that's about 1, that's never an exact thing, right? So it's almost always I'm going to score on either side of 1 because it could be a little above, it could be a little below. Where's this box again? Okay. And cheek width, I'm going to skip label process. Take a look there. And looks entire. Let's see, first of all, so a lot of what I do when I'm working through the guides, I'm looking over here, is the thing I think it is still in there. And if not, I'm going to, as it disappears, then I might spend a little extra time on the character. Did I get it right? Did I interpret it? And then be open to the fact that maybe it isn't what I think it is. So here, frigida still is following along, and we can watch what other species are doing at the same time. These mandibles are, in that moderate to long part of the universe. So I'm going to score it for both because I don't want to be overly restrictive. And that's the usefulness of, see, I'm down to 19. That's the usefulness. I don't have to. So there's a distinct corners, and you can see only 69 species have that. I don't want to overly restrict things as I go along, because I can always go back and uncheck something and see what happens. But once a species is off the list, then you don't get it back. So it's better to be conservative as you walk through at least the first time. So propodial triangle, looking again at that, and I see there's a tiny, tiny basal fringe. It's not absolutely 0, but it's nearly 0. And I have a category of 5 to 50% here. So that is
2-minute warning, my friend.
Okay. All right. Can we get there? And so when we look at, so I'm down to a small number, including a lot of our friends here. And so if I'm looking at the abdomen, which is the last, usually the last several characters, and I see, looking at the sternites too. So I see a very granular presentation. I can make out some pitting, but I'm not 100% sure on that. And there are very weak hair bands. These are all ambiguous characters that, except for the granularity. So I know it's granular. I don't know if that helps. It really didn't. And I saw things that could be absent or it could be sparse, or something in between. Let's just, so we're just going to experiment. And when I do sparse, these sparser ones, it disappears. And if I do absent, they all remain in there. So I haven't really gained anything. Again, and the hair bands are so nebulous here that I'm not sure how it'd be scored. So in these particular cases, I would not bother to answer these two questions here because I'm not sure. They're presenting in a different way, and that's a nice thing. I just go on to another character. Now here on sternum 6, when I'm looking at this again, this will be interesting. I am a little bit unsure whether there's dog ears on the sides or not because of all the hair in that area. So it's not reflexed across the entire margin as we saw before, so it probably is gets eliminated, and it did. It's either flat or with distinct teeth, which is odd. So with flat, everything stays in. With the distinct teeth, Erigeniae stays in, but everything else goes away. So again, we're down to here. Now I can hit simplify, but what I also can do is, knowing insider knowledge, well, I know it's not clarkella because we just were looking at that. I know it's not Carolina because it doesn't have a long face. I know it's not Erigeniae because it doesn't have a forked S8. Erythroniae, I'm not 100% sure. Frigida, I'm not 100% sure. Mandibularis, I know it's not that because it doesn't have a tooth, as does trident underneath the mandible. So now I'm down to these two, and now when I hit simplify, it's just going to give me characters that split those two. I'm looking up here. I don't see anything specific for separating those two out. So that leaves me with characteristics that I want to get rid of this little bar. So I do have S8, but when I'm looking at these things, the two specimens, the two species remaining are scored for weakly emarginate. One is scored for emarginate, one is scored for entire. This doesn't give me a lot of confidence in that character is going to be that helpful because none of those are extreme cases. So I've got the facial quadrangle. I take a look at this and I'm looking at this thing as, in my book, it is very broad. And so we see frigida indeed pops out doing that. I'm going to take it off because I want to go through here and see if I've got several characters that line up with frigida. Because when you're down to two specimens using Discover Life, that means they've got a lot of similar aspects, at least in the suite of all these characters. So it's useful to continue to go through. So here's malar area minimum length. So short between 1 and 2 times the eye ring, moderate. So absent is not on there. Moderate, but not more than that, but less than 1/5. That seems to fit pretty well. I'm not sure that what's going to separate out here, but it does give me frigida again. When we look at Clypeus, hairs, dense throughout, partially, and then only dense laterally and sometimes towards the middle, and partially obscuring the face. So when I'm looking at this, this has got clearly super dense hairs. So hit that. Again, it gives me frigida when I look. So we're really nailing it is frigida case here. So Clypeus, dulled throughout, shiny in center and dulled along the edges. And we are dulled throughout. So I'm not sure we need to go.
You've got 60
any
seconds and I'm
further.
gonna cut
Okay.
you off.
All right. Let's just say we have lots of evidence that it's frigida. In particular, we have a little label that says it's frigida. But I'll stop there and ask for questions, and anyone else with insights into the males of thaspii and clarkella largely would look similar, I think, to the very distinctive female. But and then what Andrena or something else do the people must speak and give us indications of what to do next.
I want to hear more about Andrena tridens. That's another one that's given me trouble.
Yeah, so we covered tridens a couple weeks ago, but when I'm looking at, which is common, it's maybe the most common of the toothed mandibled male Andrena in our woods. So it is definitely a woods species, strongly associated with woodlands. It has a relatively short, so I'm talking about the females, has a relatively short facial fovea, also very black. So the facial fovea, I believe I'm working off memory, in comparison is does not extend down as far. Now, how far it goes, I'm not 100% sure, but a lot of times I can just see that smaller black facial fovea and know that I'm working with tridens there.
Don't
Those,
have
and
to
it's
go
got,
home.
okay.
But I am. So I'm just going to stop the recording. Eric also
Okay,
has some
I can
comments.
continue.
You guys can keep chatting.
My visitors
Bye.
are not here
See
yet.
you guys next year.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Thanks so much. So it also has very pronounced